hadn't seen the house in nearly 17 years, but I remembered the curve in the road just before it came into view. The way the trees broke, the way the slope dipped slightly, like even the land wanted to keep its distance from what stood there. My wife May was asleep in the passenger seat, her arms crossed over her chest. Our daughter Anya, 6 years old and light as a feather, had curled up in the back with her headphones on, humming quietly along to something only she could hear. My mother sat behind me, upright, her hands folded neatly on her lap, eyes focused on the road ahead like she had never left. It was late afternoon when we arrived in the old mountain town of Shigu. The sun hadn't set yet, but the light was already different, thicker somehow, like it had to push through something older than air. There weren't many people on the street. A man with a straw hat sweeping the front of a shuttered storefront looked up as we drove past. He stared for a second too long, broom paused mid-sweep. "Do they still remember us here?" I asked, not turning. My mother didn't blink. Some things don't leave. The road narrowed near the top where the houses thinned and gave way to a slope of trees. I parked just outside the gate, and we stepped out into a quiet so complete it made the car engine sound sacrilegious. The house was waiting. It stood at the edge of a slope, flanked by a crumbling stone wall and overgrown hedges that had once been trimmed with care. Its roof was curved in the old Fujian style, though moss had started to grow across the ridges. The paint on the shutters had long peeled away. The wood was swollen and splintered from rain and years of silence. "It's smaller than I thought," May said. "No," my mother murmured. "You're just bigger now." We walked up the short path. Weeds pressed against our ankles. The cicadas had stopped singing. My mother retrieved the old brass key from her purse and turned it in the lock. The door opened with a sigh, like something breathing out stale breath after holding it too long. Inside, the smell hit me first. Old wood, dried herbs, mothballs, and dust. It wasn't foul, just forgotten. Time had settled thickly over everything. The wooden altar in the main room stood undisturbed, its incense holders empty, the drawer for ancestral names slipped half open, as if waiting for someone to finish a sentence. We spent the first few hours sweeping, cleaning, and opening windows that hadn't been opened in years. May took Anya to the bedroom we'd share, my uncle's old room with a cracked photo of a bodhisattva still hanging on the wall, and laid out bedding we brought from the city. My mother moved quietly through the home, touching the walls, the corners, the threshold stones, like she was remembering something or greeting someone. I found her later standing in front of the family altar, hands clasped together, head bowed low. "It hasn't been used in a long time," I said. She didn't look up. "It will be." That night, after we'd unpacked, she asked me to take her into town for supplies. "You should all come," she said. "Let them see we've returned." Downtown Shigu was little more than 2 main streets, a row of older buildings with tiled roofs and faded signage. The corner grocery still had a single humming fluorescent light over the register. An old woman behind the counter glanced up and gave us a polite, shallow nod. I remembered her vaguely from my childhood, Mrs. Lin, or maybe Mrs. Lean. She looked the same, just smaller. My mother greeted her respectfully. "We've come back for Ghost Festival." The woman's expression didn't change. "For which family?" "The Lin family," my mother said. Mrs. Lean froze. Her eyes flicked toward me, then to Anya holding my hand. She gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes and turned to fill our order without another word. Afterward, as we walked back to the car with incense sticks, spirit money, tea leaves, pork belly, apples, and buns, I asked, "Did you see the way she looked at us?" "They remember," my mother said simply. "Not everything fades." The next morning, we began the preparation. Ghost Festival wasn't just about remembering. It was about offering, appeasing, making sure the gates between the living and the dead stayed open just enough, but not too wide. You gave the dead food and fire. You burned joss paper in stacks, letting the smoke rise like currency into the beyond. You made sure they knew you hadn't forgotten. Mai helped lay the table out front. We cleaned the steps, set down a red cloth, and arranged the dishes with care. Anya watched from the doorway, her face scrunched in concentration. She helped me light the candles while my mother chanted quietly behind us, hands weaving small, practiced circles in the air. The altar was simple, 3 sticks of incense placed upright in an iron bowl filled with ash, a small cup of tea, steamed buns with red bean filling, sliced pork belly with garlic and sauce, apples cut in quarters, a bowl of rice with a single pair of chopsticks standing straight up in the center. May glanced at it and frowned. "That's bad luck," she whispered. "Chopsticks upright like that. It looks like funeral rites." My mother didn't correct it. Anya tilted her head. "Who are we feeding?" "Our family," I said. "All of them." I paused. "The ones who came before us. Do they eat?" I looked at the table, the rising incense, the unmoving air. "Not the way we do." That evening, after dark, the town took on a strange stillness. Even the insects quieted. We walked the streets briefly to see the other homes. Each doorstep had a similar table, some more elaborate than others. Some had lanterns, some burned more incense than necessary. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of roasted meat. Stray dogs paced the alleys, waiting for their moment. People nodded when we passed, but no one lingered. "They're avoiding us," May said. "They're afraid," my mother replied, as if that explained everything. When we returned home, we left the offerings on the table and sat inside with the lights low. Anya fell asleep in May's lap. I sat near the window watching the incense waver against the dark. My mother remained by the altar, eyes closed, fingers steepled, lips barely moving. No one spoke until midnight came and went. May eventually turned in. I stayed a little longer. Something about the night felt suspended, like the whole town was listening for something, and no one wanted to be the first to speak. Before bed, I went out to check the tray. The incense had burned halfway down. The food was untouched. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Then I went inside and locked the door, not sure why that suddenly felt important. In the distance, a single dog barked, then another, then silence. The next day passed slowly. We woke to the sounds of the town coming alive, the crackle of firecrackers in the distance, the muted chatter of vendors setting up their carts, and the faint rhythmic clanging of temple bells from somewhere down the hill. May was already up when I came into the kitchen, quietly washing rice for breakfast while Anya sat at the table drawing something with a stubby pencil. My mother was outside, kneeling near the doorstep with her hands pressed against the stones, as if she could read the house's memory by touch. "You think the food will go this time?" May asked without looking at me. I poured tea for both of us. "What do you mean this time? It's the first day. I mean tonight, when we set it out. Do you think the ancestors will take it?" Her voice was flat, but I could tell she was testing the words, as though speaking about it too casually might offend someone. "They always do," I said, though I felt no certainty behind it. After breakfast, we went into town again. The streets were busier now, lined with makeshift stalls selling everything from incense bundles to stacks of paper money, folded into the shapes of gold ingots. May held Anya's hand tightly as we walked, and I carried a woven basket for the offerings we'd need that night. Fresh pork, tea, fruit, and some candies for the younger spirits. At one stall, a woman in her 60s, her hair pulled back tight, squinted at me with a kind of recognition that felt heavy. "You're Lin Zhao's grandson," she said suddenly, as if the realization had just struck her. "Yes," I said, unsure if I should smile. Her lips pressed together. "Your family hasn't come back for years. My uncle lives in Kaohsiung now. We just came for the festival." The woman's eyes lingered on me for a beat longer, then moved to May, and finally to Anya. She muttered something under her breath, turned and busied herself with arranging her joss paper. I didn't push it. I just paid and left. By late afternoon, the village seemed to retreat into its own preparation. Curtains were drawn. Smoke from early incense offerings drifted between the houses, sweet and bitter. My mother supervised as May and I laid everything out on a low wooden table outside the front door. She insisted on cleaning the table 3 times, wiping each surface with salt water and sprinkling coarse rice grains across the top before placing the offerings. "This house has been asleep for too long," she said softly. We need them to remember us." As dusk settled, we set the food on the table, the pork belly sliced and arranged neatly on a plate, 3 perfect cups of oolong tea, oranges, apples, and sweet rice cakes stacked in a small pyramid. Anya watched with wide eyes as my mother lit the incense. The smoke curled upward, trailing pale ribbons into the air. "Why do we have to feed them?" Anya asked. "Because they fed us once," I said, though I wasn't sure she understood. "It's respect. Will they come here to eat?" "They're not like us," May said gently. "They take what they need in other ways." My mother handed me 3 incense sticks. I lit them from the candle flame and bowed 3 times before placing them upright in the ash bowl. The air felt heavier, almost as if the smell of smoke had weight. When the last stick was planted, my mother stepped back and whispered something I couldn't quite catch. She looked pale, but maybe that was just the dim light. As the night deepened, the street grew unnervingly quiet. Most families had finished their rituals and gone inside, leaving their tables and offerings alone. I stayed near the door, half watching, half listening. From somewhere in the dark, a dog began to bark. Short, sharp bursts, as though it had seen something moving that shouldn't be there. Another dog joined in further down the street. Soon the sound faded, leaving silence so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath. Inside, May and my mother were talking in low voices over the clink of cups. Anya had fallen asleep curled up on a bamboo mat near the wall. I should have gone to bed too, but I felt compelled to sit there, watching the table. The candle flame flickered once, twice, though there was no wind. Something shifted in the street. I thought I saw a shadow move, a long, thin shape gliding across the road before disappearing into the alley. My mind told me it was nothing. My body wasn't so sure. The air was damp, the kind of damp that clings to your clothes and settles in your throat. I stepped outside onto the porch, looking left and right. The street was empty. Behind me, the house creaked, an old beam settling. I stayed out there until the incense burned low. No one touched the food. Not the stray dogs, not the wind, not even the smallest insect. It was as if our table didn't exist to the night. When I finally went inside, I locked the door. I woke just before dawn. The room was dim, pale gray light bleeding in through the old shutters. May was asleep beside me, one hand on Anya's back. My mother was already up. I heard her moving softly in the hallway. I stepped outside to check the offerings. The table looked exactly as we'd left it. The pork, the rice cakes, the tea, everything untouched. Even the candle had burned halfway and gone out, leaving a thin curl of hardened wax. I frowned. Down the street, I could see other families collecting their empty plates and bowls, laughing quietly with the morning ease of a ritual completed. Their tables were picked clean. Ours looked as though no one had even approached. I lifted one of the oranges. It was cool, as if it had sat in the shadow all night. "Maybe the dogs didn't get this far," May said, coming up behind me. "They always get this far," I said, more sharply than I meant to. My mother stepped outside, her face unreadable. She stared at the table for a long time, then gathered everything silently and carried it inside. She didn't say a word as she scraped the food into the bin. The sound of the pork hitting the bottom of the trash can made me feel sick in a way I couldn't explain. "We'll try again tonight," she said finally. May gave me a questioning look, but I didn't answer. Something about the way my mother's voice trembled made it clear this wasn't optional. The day was long and restless. May suggested taking Anya to the temple market to keep her distracted, but I stayed behind with my mother. We swept the porch again, though it didn't need it, and polished the incense holders until the metal gleamed. My mother spent most of the afternoon writing names on thin red slips of paper, ancestral names I only half remembered hearing as a child. She folded them carefully, placing them into the altar drawer inside the house, whispering something each time she closed it. "Why didn't they take the food?" I asked finally. She didn't look up. "Sometimes they don't come. Why not?" Her hand paused over the paper. "Sometimes it's because they're angry. Angry about what?" She didn't answer. That night, we set out the second offering. The air was thicker, warmer, as if the day hadn't quite let go of the heat. We added extra food: roast chicken, sesame cakes, a bowl of noodles, and 3 fresh cups of tea. Anya watched the flames of the incense carefully, like she was expecting them to bend or change shape. "Will they come tonight?" she asked. "They'll come," my mother said, though her voice was quieter this time. As the sky darkened, the dogs began to bark again. Not just 1 or 2 this time, but several, their cries echoing across the street, bouncing between the houses. I went to the door and looked out, but the street was empty. The sound of paws skittering over dirt reached my ears, something moving just out of sight, circling. I felt a cold prickle at the back of my neck. The second night's offering sat on the table, neatly arranged just like the first, though this time we tried to do everything more precisely. My mother insisted on using different tea, oolong steeped exactly 6 minutes, and added dried squid to the plate, murmuring something about how the older ancestors used to prefer it. May contributed a bowl of sesame balls, sweet and sticky, which Anya kept reaching for until my mother gently tapped her wrist away. "No touching after the incense is lit," she said. "But why?" "They know what's theirs," my mother replied, not unkindly. "They don't like to share." This time, we lit the incense earlier, just before the sun dipped fully below the mountains. The flame caught fast, curling into thick ribbons of smoke that seemed darker than the night around them. The air had taken on a stillness again, like the village was holding itself very still, pretending not to breathe. May leaned in and whispered, "It smells different tonight." It did, less floral, more burnt, like something smoldering beneath damp leaves. We stood around the table a little longer than the night before, as if waiting might make a difference. The dogs had started again, barking in uneven bursts. There was no pattern to it. One would start far off, followed by another closer, then a sudden silence. At one point I thought I heard a low growl just down the road, followed by the sound of something moving quickly across gravel. When I looked, there was nothing. My mother stood the entire time with her back straight, eyes locked on the smoke. Her lips moved the whole while, silent prayers that I didn't recognize. Anya eventually tugged at May's sleeve and asked to go inside. May hesitated, then nodded. I stayed out front with my mother until the incense had burned halfway. "Do you feel it?" she asked, voice low. I nodded, though I didn't have the words to describe what it was. When we stepped inside, I turned to lock the door behind us, and I swear I saw something dart between 2 houses across the street, just a flicker of movement, like the brief absence of light. No footsteps, no sound, just a shifting dark that vanished as soon as I focused on it. We didn't sleep well. There were noises again, scraping, not quite close, but not far either. It was like hearing someone walk in circles around the house, over and over. The windows rattled once, but when I got up to check, the glass was still. I stood in the living room for nearly an hour, barefoot on the cool wooden floor, watching the candle on the altar flicker despite the absence of wind. When dawn broke, the silence was immediate and unnatural, like whatever had been listening outside had finally stopped and was waiting. I stepped out onto the porch. The food was still there, all of it. The squid had dried and curled slightly at the edges, the teacup still full, the incense burnt out into pale gray stems. Nothing was touched. Not a single offering moved, not a crumb out of place. I checked again, slowly this time, hoping I was wrong. Down the road, a woman swept her front steps, her head down. When I raised a hand in greeting, she didn't return it, just turned slightly so her back faced us. Across the street, a man emerged from a shop carrying an empty plate. He placed it back on a low altar table inside and nodded at someone I couldn't see. Then he saw me. His face stiffened. He lowered his head and walked briskly back inside. May came out behind me. She looked at the table, then at my face. "They didn't come," she said. Maybe they did and just didn't. "They didn't come," she repeated. My mother joined us moments later, carrying a straw broom. She didn't look surprised, just calmly swept the ashes from the incense burner and carried the food back inside without a word. We didn't eat it. None of us did. We threw it all away again. This time, even Anya didn't ask why. Later that morning, I went back into town alone. The market stalls had reopened, but they seemed quieter. The vendors spoke in lowered tones. When I approached the incense stall, the same old woman from the day before looked up and stiffened. She watched me approach but didn't speak. "I'd like to get more joss paper," I said. She didn't move. "I'm with the Lin family," I added. "We're just trying to do it right." That was when she turned her eyes fully on me. There was something tight and cautious behind them. "Which Lin?" she asked. "Lin Zhao's grandson." She exhaled slowly, as if some tension had just been confirmed. "Use the yellow paper," she said flatly. "Burn it by the well. Don't do it in front of your house again." "Why not?" She started folding paper into the familiar ingot shapes. "Sometimes when you knock and they don't answer, it's because they've moved on. Sometimes it's because they don't want to talk to you. That doesn't make sense. We haven't wronged anyone. We just want to offer." She looked up then, her voice still low. "Then maybe it wasn't you who did the wrong." I left with the folded paper in silence. Back at the house, I tried asking my mother again about our family history. I thought maybe she'd open up, explain why the villagers acted like we had a debt we hadn't paid. She was in the back courtyard, burning old leaves in a rusted metal basin. When I asked, she didn't stop stirring the coals. "We lived here a long time," she said, "before and after the war. People remember things, not always accurately, not always kindly. That's not an answer." She tossed another bundle of leaves into the fire. "Some families burned incense, some didn't, some did things they shouldn't have. But time passes. You're not him, you're not your father, you're not your grandfather. Just do the ritual and let it go. But if it's not being accepted, then you do it again." That night I didn't light the incense right away. I waited until after dark, when the rest of the village had finished their rituals. The street was dim and quiet again, the last traces of smoke from other homes trailing away on an unseen breeze. We'd changed the offerings. Again, different fruit, steamed buns from a local baker, stronger tea. Emmy even lit sandalwood oil in a small dish beside the table, but I hesitated before placing the incense. Something in the pit of my stomach told me we were missing something, some piece of the ritual that had never been passed down. "Should we say their names?" I asked suddenly. My mother stood at the edge of the porch, her arms crossed. "Do you remember them?" "No, but we have the slips. Can we read them?" She stared at me for a long moment. "No, why not? Because if you say the wrong name, someone else might answer." I didn't argue. I planted the incense and lit it. That night I couldn't sleep. Something about the silence felt wrong. The dogs didn't bark this time. There was no scratching, no pacing, just stillness. I lay in bed beside May, listening to Anya's soft breathing, and felt my heart beat louder than it should have. At some point I got up and went outside. The table was exactly as we left it. I stepped closer and felt it then, a strange chill that crept along my back like breath on skin. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dark. The food looked fresh. The buns hadn't dried, the tea hadn't cooled, not a single offering had been disturbed, but there were marks in the dust on the road. I walked forward, crouched down, and looked more closely. Bare footprints, human, thin, narrow, barefoot. They trailed from the far end of the street, past 2 houses, directly toward our doorstep. And then they stopped. Not at the table, not at the steps. They stopped 2 feet away, facing the offering, and there they ended. I followed the prints backward, tracing them step by step. They were deep, well-formed, real, not the vague impressions left by wind or water. Someone, or something, had walked up the road and approached our house, then halted just before crossing into our space. It hadn't come closer. It hadn't been allowed to. I stared at that final footprint for a long time, then looked back at the untouched food, the unbroken incense ash, the locked front door. Whatever had come last night had stopped just short, like it wanted to be fed, but wasn't allowed to eat. By the 3rd night, something had changed in the air. It wasn't just the silence anymore. It was how that silence felt, dense, thick enough to press against the skin, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but occupied. The offering table had become a fixture on the porch now, always clean, always prepared. We no longer discussed whether we would do it, we just did, as if not doing it might leave the door open to something worse. This time, the food was prepared earlier. My mother simmered pork and eggs in soy and star anise, humming something under her breath that I didn't recognize. May laid out store-bought sweets with trembling hands, and Anya quietly folded pieces of joss paper the way she'd watched my mother do. No one smiled. No one asked why we were bothering when nothing had been taken. We were well past that question. By twilight, the food was ready. The rice steamed in neat mounds. The incense sat in its ash bowl waiting. We stood around the table again as the last light of the sun drained from the sky. When I struck the match and lit the incense, I noticed it immediately. Something wrong in the flame. The stick flared too fast, as though the paper inside had caught fire, and then settled into a red glow. The smoke began to curl, but instead of rising, it twisted downward. It spiraled toward the table, pooling around the plates like mist in a bowl. May noticed it too. Her hand touched mine lightly, and I felt the shiver through her fingers. My mother didn't react. She just stepped forward and placed 3 slips of red paper beneath the bowl. "Stay inside tonight," she said. "You're going to leave it out again?" "We have to," she said. "It's the 3rd night. If they don't take it now." She didn't finish the sentence. That night, we all stayed in the living room. No one said it, but none of us wanted to sleep. Anya curled up beside me on the tatami mat, a blanket pulled over her head. My mother sat near the door, back straight, eyes open, and I stood in the kitchen for nearly 2 hours staring at the back door. Around midnight, the sound began. It was faint at first, like dry twigs brushing under the floorboards. Then, little by little, it grew louder, not urgent, not frantic, deliberate. A slow dragging sound like nails across wood, the kind of movement that didn't try to hide. May sat up straight. Anya stirred. "Do you hear that?" May whispered. I didn't answer. I crossed the living room and knelt near the floor, placing my palm on the boards. It was right beneath us, a low, dry scrape, then a pause, then another, closer this time. Anya sat up, her voice small and confused. "There's someone under the house." I turned sharply. "What did you say?" She didn't look afraid, just serious. "I saw them." I woke up and looked at the cracks near the corner. "There's a space in the floor by the shelf." I moved toward where she pointed, gently sliding the low wooden cabinet away from the wall. Sure enough, one of the planks beneath was warped and left a narrow, uneven slit, no wider than a coin, but enough to see darkness underneath. I lay flat and angled my eye toward the gap. At first, there was only black, then movement. Just a flash, so brief I might have doubted it, but I saw it, a hand, pale, filthy. The fingers were curled, twisted inward like they were arthritic or broken, and dragging across the soil. No clothing, just skin stretched thin over knuckles. I pushed away from the floor and sat upright, breathing hard. My mother was already lighting more incense, her movements sharp and practiced. She placed it at each corner of the room, then muttered something under her breath too fast for me to catch. "What's under there?" I asked. "They're trying to come in," she said. "They?" She didn't answer. The scratching continued until around 2 in the morning. We sat in silence. No one slept. At one point, I stood and leaned against the doorway, peering through the window to the porch. The offering table was still there, but something had changed. The incense had burned in the wrong direction. I could see the stick still standing, ash not hanging down but up, curling into the air like brittle fingers reaching back toward the stem. The ash hung in defiance of gravity, tapering upward like the smoke itself had reversed. I opened the door slowly, stepping onto the porch with careful feet. The food still sat in place, but now the tea had spilled, each cup empty though not knocked over, and the rice bowls had grown cold, the steam no longer rising. Then I looked down at the table. A single long scratch, clean and shallow, ran across the surface, right through the middle of the tablecloth, carving through the wood beneath. not a slash, a trace, like a finger dipped in something sharp. I backed away and shut the door. Back inside, I didn't say anything. There was no point. May had already seen it in my face. I moved the cabinet back over the warped floorboard. The gap was still visible. No one suggested blocking it. We stayed in the living room until morning. At some point, we must have drifted to sleep. I woke up sitting upright, my neck sore, my mother gone from the room. The incense in the corners had burned down to gray nubs. Sunlight filtered through the window. The porch was quiet. When I opened the door, the table was exactly the same as the night before. The food untouched, the incense reduced to cold stems. But something was different about the steps. I crouched low and brushed at the layer of dust and ash that had built up along the edges of the porch. Footprints. Not leading to the table, but beneath it. Long, thin prints. Bare feet, toes splayed slightly outward, heel dragging behind. The stride was uneven, like the walker had a limp. The prints started just outside the border of the property and stopped at the edge of the porch, just below where the incense had burned. I checked the yard. The prints weren't in the dirt, only the dust. Like whoever had walked up had come from nowhere. May stood behind me, arms crossed. They came again. They never left, I said. Anya stepped outside between us. She was still in her pajamas, her eyes puffy with sleep. She pointed at the table. He was here. I turned to her slowly. Who? The man under the house. He was crouching. May bent down. Where did you see him, sweetie? Anya pointed not to the porch, but to the floor, beneath the table, beneath the offering. He was under there, she said. His arms came out first, then his head. He looked up at the food but didn't eat. He just stayed still, like he was waiting. I swallowed hard. When did you see this? Last night, she said. I woke up again. I wanted to look out the window. He was already there. My mother emerged from inside and laid fresh salt along the threshold. We're not safe anymore, she said. Not to anyone in particular. Not with this. I looked back toward the crawl space under the house, and for the first time I saw something I hadn't before. A slat of wood beneath the front room had been shifted slightly ajar. It was open just wide enough for someone to look through. I stared at the slat beneath the house, the slight gap in the wood barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. It hadn't been like that when we arrived. I was sure of it. No draft had come through the floor before, no smell, no sound. Now it felt like a line had been drawn. Something beneath watching, listening, patient. That morning, while May took Anya into town to buy more candles and incense, I stayed behind. I told them I needed to repair the warped floorboard near the shelf, but the truth was simpler than that. I needed to understand what was wrong with this place. I started in the storage room. Boxes stacked with old photo albums, rotting newspapers from the 80s, and the remnants of a shrine long disassembled. In the back of a cabinet, I found a collection of incense ash stored in glass jars, neatly labeled in my grandfather's handwriting with dates going back decades. But they stopped in 1997. That was the last one. The rest of the cabinet was empty. When I brought this up to my mother, she seemed almost dazed. He stopped offering after your father moved out, she said quietly. He thought it didn't matter anymore. That's not how this works. No, she agreed, but it's how he lived. I pushed harder. What happened back then? Why do the villagers look at us like we brought something back with us? She didn't answer, not directly. Just said, there's a reason your uncle never came back. It didn't make sense. We hadn't been gone that long. My grandfather had lived in this house until the early 2000s. My father, before he left, used to light incense every ghost festival. I remembered standing with him on the steps as a boy. We'd burned paper, offered tea. I remembered. But now the slips with the family names were gone. Not a single record remained in the altar drawer. The ashes were sealed in jars, not scattered or returned. The offerings had stopped quietly and apparently for good. I needed answers, so I went to the only place no one else ever bothered with, the old shed at the back of the property. The shed had been there longer than the house. It leaned sideways like it wanted to collapse, but had never quite earned the right. When I pushed the rusted door open, the smell of mildew and soil hit me like a punch. The inside was cluttered with garden tools, broken ceramic pots, an old broom that had been overtaken by spider webs. Dust clung to everything like skin. But there was something else. In the far corner, buried beneath a pile of rotted firewood, I found a box. It was sealed with cord, wrapped tight in red string faded nearly pink with age. The top was etched with symbols I didn't recognize. Not characters exactly, but more like crude markings scratched in with something sharp. My hands were shaking as I unwrapped it. The box groaned as I lifted the lid, hinges brittle with rust. Inside were 3 things. The first was a bundle of incense sticks, bound with black twine, unlit, unburned, and slightly damp, as if someone had dunked them in water and sealed them before they could dry. The second was a folded piece of red silk cloth, stiff with age. I unfolded it and found a name written inside in ink so faded it looked like bruising. Not my grandfather's, not my great-grandfather's, a name I didn't know. Beneath it were crude characters for remove, silence, and unspoken. The third thing was a photograph. I held it close to the light. It was old, creased, water-damaged, but still legible. A family stood in front of the altar, all wearing formal white. It wasn't my father or grandfather, but there was a familiar curve to one of the men's shoulders. The youngest child looked like a younger version of my uncle. There were 6 people in total, and off to the side, barely in frame, was a 7th figure, not standing, not dressed, just kneeling at the side of the altar, eyes lowered. Unlit incense sticks were laid across his lap. There was something written on the back of the photograph in the same bruised ink. Do not offer, do not speak, do not look. When I returned to the house, my mother was sweeping the front steps again. Her posture was rigid, almost defensive. I showed her the photo. She didn't react the way I expected. She didn't cry, didn't panic. She simply took it from my hand, turned it over, and said, "You weren't supposed to see this." "Who is he?" I asked. "The one kneeling?" "He was a mistake," she said. I pressed further. "Was he family?" "Yes." "Why wasn't he given rights?" "Because he wasn't supposed to be remembered." I stared at her. "You don't get to decide that." "No," she agreed, "but someone did." I asked her if it had anything to do with the occupation, something people had whispered about in town. She didn't deny it. "There was betrayal," she said at last. "During the war, things were done, people went missing, and someone in our family benefited. That boy was blamed. He was never allowed into the shrine. They barred his name from the family record, and even when he died, they buried him without fire." She nodded. "No incense, no name paper, no final meal. They left him hungry." She didn't speak after that. I knew then what the villagers had been avoiding. It wasn't about who we were now. It was about who we'd forgotten, and someone or something had remembered for us. That night, I didn't help prepare the offering. I sat alone in the back of the house with the box open beside me, staring at the name on the silk cloth, repeating it silently until it stuck. May stayed quiet, sensing the tension, and my mother didn't speak. Even Anya seemed to move more carefully, as if something fragile had been laid across the air, and we were all afraid to tear it. Just before sunset, I slipped the folded silk back into the box, wrapped it again in red thread, and hid it in the corner of the altar room. The moment I did, the temperature dropped, not dramatically, but enough to raise the hairs on my arms, enough to make me feel like I was being watched from the ceiling beams. At dinner, no one had much of an appetite. Anya poked at her rice and said softly, "I don't think he liked being forgotten." I looked at her carefully. "Did you see him again?" She nodded. "He didn't come out last night, but I heard him. He said his stomach hurt. My throat felt tight. Was he under the house?" She shook her head. "No, he was in the floor." Later that evening, when the offerings were placed again on the porch, I stepped outside alone after everyone else had gone to bed. The street was dark. The windows of the other houses were closed. Even the crickets had quieted. I brought the incense out in a shallow dish, 3 fresh sticks. As I placed them into the ash, I paused. The name from the silk cloth burned in my mouth. I didn't say it, but I thought it hard and lit the incense. The smoke caught, curling upward briefly, then reversed direction. It bent down, brushing the food like fingers. I stood perfectly still, listening. From beneath the floorboards behind me came a single soft sound, a breath, drawn in through teeth. The breath I heard under the floor wasn't imagined. It wasn't the creak of wood or the groan of age. It was wet, rattling, and too close to be from anything outside. I backed away from the threshold and shut the door, double latching it. But even then I could feel the house pulse slightly under my feet, like something had shifted its weight down there, just enough to remind me it could move. The next morning I didn't speak to my mother or May. I waited until Anya was outside with May tending to the joss paper, then grabbed a flashlight and a heavy pair of gloves and pried open the panel in the floor near the offering room, the one that had warped slightly during the second night. It was looser than it should have been, as if it had been removed recently and not quite reset. When I pulled it fully free, a warm gust of air rose from beneath, muggy, stale, and layered with something more, ash and rot, and the faint tang of rust. The crawl space beneath the house was shallow. The dirt floor had been packed down from years of neglect, and wooden beams held up the house on squat stone feet. Dust clung to every surface. My skin prickled as I lowered myself through the hatch and into the dark. I flicked on the flashlight. The beam caught on cobwebs, old bottles, and scattered bricks. For a long moment, all I heard was the sound of my own breathing. Then I began to crawl forward. There was something unnatural about the air down there. It pressed against my ears like pressure before a storm. Each time I moved forward, I expected to find the remains of an animal or the scattered trash of years gone by. But there were no bones, no wrappers, not even bugs, just silence and claw marks. I saw them first on the central beam, 5 jagged lines scored deep into the wood. They weren't evenly spaced like an animal's. These were closer together, human-sized, some fresher than others, overlapping and descending at uneven angles, like someone had clawed at the same spot again and again trying to get up. I reached the center of the crawl space, where the dirt looked looser, more disturbed. My flashlight caught on something half buried, a stone, then another, flat rectangular with faint red pigment flaking along the edge. I brushed away the dirt and uncovered a cluster of them, altar stones, 3, possibly 4, forming the base of what must have once been a small shrine, but it had been shoved aside, broken down, pushed into the soil like someone had tried to erase it. Beneath one of the stones was a charred incense bowl. I pulled it free. It was cracked down the middle, blackened with soot, and filled with clumped ash fused into a single mass, but no offerings had burned. It looked like the sticks had been inserted, never lit, and then buried. My stomach turned. Just past that, near the far beam, I found a bundle wrapped in what used to be cloth, now reduced to tatters soaked through with years of moisture. I pulled it toward me and the fabric gave way in my hands, revealing a sack tied with fraying rope. Inside were offerings, old ones. I froze. The sack contained at least a dozen food items, shriveled, blackened with rot, but still identifiable. Rice cakes, pickled radish, tea leaves hardened into clumps, coins wrapped in red paper. Not a single one had been eaten by rodents or touched by insects. They just sat here, preserved somehow. Preserved and rejected. These weren't forgotten offerings. These had been hidden, not delivered, not burned, just sealed away. An insult. I turned the flashlight upward and noticed something smeared along the beam above the altar stones. Faint trails of ash, like someone had tried to mark something but couldn't finish. A shape, no, a gesture, a symbol. It looked like a mouth drawn sideways, forced open, The wood around it had buckled slightly, as if something heavy had pressed against it from below. Suddenly I felt the floor above shift, just once. The smallest tremble, like someone had stepped onto the wooden planks overhead, but I knew no one was inside the house. May and Anya were still out in the yard. My mother had gone to the temple. I froze. My hand gripped the flashlight so tight it clicked off. Darkness swallowed me. I fumbled the switch. It clicked twice before the light returned. The beam cut through the space again. But something had changed. A trail. The dirt just ahead of me had been disturbed. 2 parallel lines, like hands dragging backward through soil, fingertips clawing slightly inward. Whatever was down here had moved. I don't remember crawling backward. I don't remember climbing out, but I remember the scrape of something beneath my knees just as I reached the opening, the brush of cold air from below, the feeling that something long and thin had raised its hand toward me, but not to grab, to gesture, an invitation. When I emerged, my shirt was soaked through with sweat. My arms were streaked with dirt and ash. May saw me from the garden and came running. "What were you doing under there?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Anya, standing behind her, tilted her head slightly and said, "You found him, didn't you?" I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The man who watches, the one who's always hungry." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the box from the shed in my lap and the incense bowl from under the house set on the table beside me. The smell of the rotting offerings still clung to my hands no matter how many times I washed them. My mother finally came in from her room just before midnight. She looked at the bowl, then at me. "You saw the shrine?" "I did. You found the sack?" I nodded. She sat slowly, her hands trembling slightly. They thought it would be enough to just bury it, pretend the mistake never happened. But something that dies without name or offering doesn't just disappear. It clings. It remembers. "They didn't even light the incense," I said. "No," she whispered. "They didn't dare. They were afraid it would carry his name." "I think it's too late now," I said. Outside, the wind picked up, but it didn't feel like a breeze. It felt like breath being exhaled slowly, steadily, just outside the walls. That night, the scratching didn't start right away. It started with a knock, not on the door, but from beneath. 3 slow thumps, spaced apart, rattling the wood of the floor just under the offering room. May and Anya huddled in the bedroom. My mother lit incense again, this time placing it not in the altar but directly over the trap door to the crawl space. As the smoke rose, it split into 2 separate tendrils, one rising, one sinking, curling against the cracks of the floorboards. Then the smell changed. It wasn't incense anymore. It was rice, steamed pork, vinegar and ash, offerings that had never been eaten, offerings that now wanted. The thumping stopped around dawn. When I checked the porch that morning, the offering table had been overturned. Nothing was missing, but everything had been touched. The chopsticks were snapped in half, the tea spilled, the oranges bitten just once then left to rot. It was no longer a question of whether the ritual had failed. It was now a matter of how much longer the house would hold. The overturned offering table sat untouched in the morning light, a quiet testament to what had happened in the night. None of us moved to clean it. The broken chopsticks lay like snapped bones. The bitten orange had begun to spoil at the edge, curling inward with a brown tinge. My mother stood at the doorway, hands folded in front of her, mouth moving with no sound. Not prayer, not curse, just movement, like she was trying to remember words she hadn't used in decades. "We need to do it right," I said quietly. May looked up from where she knelt with Anya, brushing the girl's hair out of her face. "Right, how?" "I need to go to the temple, the big one, down by the old road near the river." My mother finally spoke. "They won't help us." "They might not," I replied, "but someone there will know the old rites, not just the festival customs, the ones before that, the ones our family must have used before they decided to bury everything." She didn't stop me. I left the house just after noon. The temple was 2 miles away by foot, sitting at the base of the hills where the river bent south through the jungle, half shaded under banyan trees. I remembered it from my childhood, small, dark, always full of smoke. It looked exactly the same now, except more run down, its paint sun-bleached and the incense urn cracked in two. Inside, I found a monk sweeping. He looked older than the stone pillars that held up the gate. He didn't smile when I entered. He didn't stop sweeping, but he looked at me, and something in his face shifted. Recognition, or maybe resignation. "I'm from the Lin family," I said. "I need help with the final offering." He stopped. "Which Lin?" "Zhao's line. My grandfather." He studied me for a long moment. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," I said, "but I am." He set his broom aside and gestured for me to follow him to the rear altar. It was covered in soot and the burned down ends of hundreds of incense sticks. "What do you want to know?" "I want to know how to properly offer to someone who was never given a name slip, someone whose soul was blocked." He didn't blink. "Unspoken dead?" I nodded. He sat beside the altar, folding his legs slowly. "The ones without rights don't rest. They linger. They rot in spirit. They become something else. When they come back, it is not to visit. It is to demand." I told him what I found, beneath the house, in the box, in the photograph. I told him about the footprints that stopped short, the incense burning in reverse, the breath beneath the floor. He listened in silence. When I finished, he rose and pulled a small wooden chest from behind the altar. Inside were thin red candles, oil, string, and slips of yellow paper I hadn't seen used in any modern rituals. "You can try," he said. "But if the name was forbidden by the family line and the shrine removed, you'll be inviting something back that was never meant to return whole. I think it's already here." He handed me the materials. "Write the name. Burn the yellow slips first, not joss paper. These, burn them with the name inked in your own blood. Light the incense only after that. One candle at each corner of the offering table. Say the name aloud, but only once, not again, never again." I left with the ritual sealed tightly in a red envelope. Back at the house, May and my mother were already preparing the final meal. Tonight was the last night of Ghost Festival. The gate between the living and dead would close before dawn. The rice was cooked. The pork was stewed with black garlic. The incense bowl was cleaned. Even Anya helped fold the offering paper, though her hands trembled slightly when she passed them to me. After sundown, I set everything outside. This time I didn't ask for help. I set the table alone. I used fresh cloth, red silk, unmarked. I placed 4 small clay dishes of salt at the corners and pressed a coin into each. The candles were arranged exactly as the monk instructed. The yellow slips with the inked name sat at the center, just under the incense bowl. I had pricked my finger with a needle, mixing the blood with ink, careful not to smear. The house watched me. Every board creaked at the wrong time. The windows ticked as though breathing. The air smelled like wet stone, even though it hadn't rained in days. I waited until the wind died down, until the insects stopped chirping, until I was sure I could hear nothing but the small, tremulous beating of my own heart. Then I lit the first candle. The flame caught, flickering low. I lit the others in turn. 1, 2, 3, then the 4th. I took the bundle of yellow slips and set them aflame in the metal bowl. The paper curled slowly, then cracked in bursts of orange. The smoke was dark and strangely heavy. It sank, not rose, spreading across the table like water. Then I said the name, just once. I felt the ground respond, not with a sound, but a presence. Like something that had been pressed flat for too long was suddenly swelling back into form. I reached for the incense and lit the first stick. It sparked, flickered, then went out. The second did the same. The third lit, and for a moment I felt relief. The smoke coiled upward, then paused in midair. It snapped downward as though yanked. The incense stick split in two with a sharp pop snapping along the grain. All 4 candles went out at once. The house groaned. The air around me turned cold, thick with something that wasn't quite wind. I tried to move, but my limbs felt slow. like I was submerged in syrup. The table trembled. The bowl shifted slightly, just enough to spill tea down the side of the cloth. The rice shook as if someone had exhaled across it. Behind me, the wood creaked. A soft, dragging sound, like knuckles sliding across the floor. I didn't turn. I couldn't. A single knock echoed from beneath the table, then another, louder, then silence. Inside the house, I heard Anya crying out for May. My mother shouted something I couldn't make out. The floorboards shook. I stepped back from the table, my hands still raised. The incense ash on the broken stick had reversed its fall. It was rising, grain by grain, defying everything. Then, as quickly as it began, the air went still. But I knew the ritual had failed. That night, the air inside the house didn't move. It hung, thick and close, as if the walls were pressing inward, smothering us in our own skin. I didn't bother cleaning the failed ritual. I left the broken incense where it had snapped, left the overturned tea to soak into the silk, left the candles where they had sputtered out. It didn't matter anymore. May said nothing as she helped Anya into bed, though she paused before tucking the blanket up to her daughter's chin. "I don't want to sleep in here," Anya whispered. "He's under us again." May looked to me, but I couldn't give her anything. Not words, not reassurance. All I could do was sit down on the floor outside the room and listen. The boards beneath me were warm, too warm. I rested my hand against them and felt the throb of movement, faint, rhythmic, not random. A slow crawling motion, like something dragging itself back and forth beneath the floor in steady patterns. Not searching, waiting. By midnight, the scratching returned, but it wasn't the hesitant brush of bone on wood that had haunted us before. This time it was deliberate, a dragging of nails across the underside of the planks, followed by sharp, sudden bursts of tapping, as if someone were writing a message in knocks and claw marks. My mother was already awake, sitting cross-legged in the offering room. She'd relit incense, though it gave off no scent, and her lips moved soundlessly. Her eyes were open but unseeing, locked on something far away or too close to bear. I tried to speak, but she raised a single hand and pressed a finger to her lips. A warning, not silence for reverence, but survival. The scratching grew louder, faster, then it stopped. May's voice broke the silence from the bedroom, panicked. "She's hot! She's burning up!" I rushed in to find Anya curled into a ball, her skin clammy, her face flushed red and glistening with sweat. Her breath came in short gasps, like each one hurt. "She was fine an hour ago," May said, trembling. "She said she felt cold and then—" Anya's eyes opened suddenly, not wide but narrow, glassy. "He's trying to get out," she whispered. "He's hungry again." Her head turned slightly toward the floor. I can hear him chewing. I swept her into my arms and carried her to the far side of the house, away from the crawl space. Every step I took felt like it echoed down into the floor, like the house itself was listening, mapping us. We sat on the sofa in the corner room. I held her while May pressed cold cloths to her forehead. My mother knelt in the hallway and lit another circle of incense sticks around the door. Then we heard the bang, a single sharp crack from beneath the living room, then another, and another. Not scraping now, not dragging, pounding. Something was trying to get through. The entire house shook with the rhythm, slow, deliberate, like a fist the size of a body slamming upward against the wood. One, then two, then a pause, then again. Each strike made the frame of the house creak and shift slightly, like old bones resisting a resurrection. The smell came next. Rot. But not just decay, it was specific, like spoiled rice and burnt oil and incense that had been left to sour in wet ash. It leaked through the cracks in the floorboards, curled beneath the doors, settled into our lungs. I gagged, pressing my nose into my shirt. May wiped Anya's face again, whispering panicked words, but the girl didn't respond. Her eyes stayed open, still listening. My mother began chanting louder now, pressing a palm to the wall, her voice rising in pitch until it cracked. The walls groaned, the lights dimmed, And then, just outside the bedroom, I heard the unmistakable sound of something sliding, flesh on wood, not walking, not crawling, slithering. I stood, my legs barely obeying, and stepped out into the hallway. There, at the end of the corridor, the floorboards bowed slightly, just enough to curve downward under weight that wasn't mine. The wood flexed and popped like something was beneath it, stretching upward with each passing second. I took a step forward, and the floor near the offering room bulged. I stumbled back as the wood swelled and cracked, as if a fist were pressing against the underside. One more inch and it would have broken through. I could hear it, feel it, pressing upward, the sharp tap of nails, the grind of teeth on the beam. He was chewing. May screamed. I spun and ran back to the other room. Anya had gone limp. I reached for her, panicking, but then I saw it, the red welts along her side, 4 lines, claw width, faint as if brushed by something not quite there but real enough to raise the skin. My mother pushed past me into the room and thrust a clay bowl of ashes into my hands. "Burn it," she said. "Now. Use the old altar, the one under the house. What? Now." Before he finishes listening, I stared at her. Listening to what? To us. The floor creaked again, this time directly beneath our feet. I didn't argue. I ran. I dropped through the crawlspace hatch with the bowl in one hand and a box of matches in the other. The flashlight swung wildly from my wrist, casting sickly yellow light across the dirt. The crawlspace no longer felt like a hollow void. It felt inhabited. The old altar stones were still there, barely disturbed, though the ash markings above them had deepened. The symbol, whatever it meant, had been finished now, completed with a single thick stroke that curled down the beam like a spine. I knelt and poured the ashes into the incense bowl. I struck a match. It fizzled once, but caught. I lit the center of the ashes and blew gently, praying the flame would take. It did. The bowl glowed red, embers spreading outward in a perfect ring. Then I spoke the name, the forbidden one, only once. The dirt shifted. The wooden beams groaned. And from the darkness to my right, I heard it. A breath. Then the wet slap of a hand on the floor. I turned the flashlight and saw nothing. But the dust had been disturbed. A long trail, dragging, leading toward me. I pressed the bowl deeper into the ashes, letting the flame rise higher. "Eat," I said through clenched teeth. "Take it. Take what you're owed." The flame snapped once, then again, and then it blew out. No wind, no movement, just gone. The dark returned, and I heard a voice, not from beside me, from within the beam above, like it had been pressed into the wood and was only now pushing out through the cracks. It spoke in a whisper of splinters and dust. "You burned the wrong meal." I crawled backward in a blind panic, hitting my head on a beam, scrambling until I found the hatch and burst through it, slamming the panel shut behind me. In the next room, Anya let out a low, shuddering breath and then began to cry. The smell was still there, thicker now. The floorboards pulsed, flexing upward in slow, nauseating waves. The banging resumed, this time from every room at once. The pounding didn't stop. It moved, room to room, wall to wall, like something testing the structure from below, looking for the weakest point. Each bang vibrated through the beams and up the walls, shuddering picture frames and rattling dishes. Somewhere in the kitchen, a glass fell and shattered, the sound swallowed by another heavy slam beneath our feet. Then it shifted again, closer. I grabbed Anya from May's arms and backed us all toward the corner of the house furthest from the altar room. May clutched the incense dish, though the sticks inside had long gone cold. My mother was chanting again, but her voice had become hoarse, the rhythm of her prayer breaking apart with each tremor from beneath. I could hear the wood splitting, not everywhere now, just one spot, one direct spot, the offering room. The planks shrieked as something heavy pushed upward, not a subtle rise, not a soft warping, but a full cracking of floorboards that had been in place for a century. The wood groaned and flexed, then burst upward with a wet, awful pop, like bone giving way under skin. Dust and ash blew outward in a wave. We all stumbled back. I shielded Anya's face. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. No movement, no more banging, just the sound of our breath, of the house shifting its weight to make room for something it had tried for decades to forget. Then, slowly, a figure began to rise from the hole in the floor. It didn't crawl, it didn't climb. It rose, as though pulled upward by invisible threads, limbs dangling, head bent, jaw slack. He was long and thin, far too tall for the space beneath the house. His body was stretched, bones sharp beneath papery skin. His hands dangled past his knees. His fingers were blackened at the tips, raw and swollen, as if they'd been used to dig through stone. There were no eyes, just hollows, bruised and weeping dark stains. His jaw hung open unnaturally wide, cracked at both corners, teeth gapped and yellowed, some missing altogether. His mouth was packed with old incense sticks. Their burnt ends protruded outward like the spines of a sea urchin. He did not speak right away. He didn't move. He just stood there in the center of the offering room, the last of the floor creaking under his impossible weight, mouth twitching faintly as the sticks inside shifted with each shallow breath. My mother dropped to her knees. She pressed her forehead to the floor and cried, "We were wrong." The figure's head tilted at that, slowly, like a dog hearing something familiar. Then the incense sticks in his mouth began to burn again, one by one. Each tip glowed orange, then white-hot, but no flame touched them. They smoldered in his mouth, smoke rising from his lips, from his empty eye sockets. He turned toward me, not fully, just his head, cracking sideways at an unnatural angle. Then he spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was my father's, and my grandfather's, and others, men I didn't know, never met, never heard, layered atop each other, each phrase rolling over the next like waves breaking at different times. "You lit the wrong name." The voice was dry and wet at once, like paper tearing underwater. "You offered what was easy, not what was owed." He took one step forward. The floor didn't creak. It buckled. My mother screamed. "We denied him. We buried his name. But he's family. He's ours." He didn't turn to her. He didn't need to. His eyes were locked on me, or whatever was left of his eyes. "You let me starve." I backed away, but the air behind me felt thick, like the walls were breathing in sync with his movements. I forced myself to speak. "What do you want?" The incense in his mouth flared brighter. "I want to be remembered." A step closer. "I want what you gave the others." Another step. Closer now. "I want my seat at the table." I didn't think. I just moved. I ran into the kitchen, grabbed the old iron incense holder from the shelf, spilled the ash onto the counter, and dumped in what was left of the name slips from the altar drawer. I didn't know if they were even his. Some were torn, others faded, but it didn't matter. It had to be something. I lit them all. The fire roared up faster than it should have. A wind burst through the house, extinguishing every other candle and incense stick. The smoke from the burner whipped around me, spiraling toward the offering room like a thread unraveling at high speed. I stumbled back. When I returned to the hall, the floor was cracked wide in a jagged starburst. He stood in the center still, but his mouth had closed now. The incense inside had burned down to ash. The smoke from my fire circled him. It didn't rise or fall. It coiled. It wrapped around his body like rope, tightening as it spun. He opened his mouth, and for the first time I heard his real voice. Not layered, not borrowed, just his. It was smaller than I expected, childlike. "You forgot me." I stepped forward slowly, heart pounding. "What was your name?" He didn't answer. His mouth closed again, and the floor beneath him gave way. No sound, no scream. He simply dropped, like a puppet with cut strings. The smoke vanished with him. The air returned to stillness, but not peace. The hole remained, black, breathing, waiting. The hole didn't close, even after the figure vanished into the darkness beneath the offering room. After the floor went still, the air settled, and the incense stopped burning. The jagged opening remained, It pulsed faintly like it was breathing. No more footsteps came from beneath it. No hands reached up, but it stayed there, black and unfinished, like a wound the house refused to scab over. May stood at the edge of the room, holding Anya tight. My mother hadn't moved from her spot near the corner, her back against the wall, eyes shut. She wasn't chanting anymore. Her voice had gone. All that was left was breath. "What do we do now?" May whispered. I didn't answer. I walked into the offering room. I stood over the opening and stared into it. Nothing stared back, but I knew something still waited there. Not the figure from before, not entirely, but something that had been shaped by years of silence, buried names, and the wrong kind of forgetting. It was still hungry, not for food, not even for fire, but for debt, for acknowledgement. I knelt at the edge of the hole. I opened the old family box I'd recovered from the shed, the one wrapped in red string. Inside were the name slips, some still legible, others crumbling. I unfolded the one I'd written in ink and blood and placed it at the hole's edge. "I remember you," I said aloud, "even if no one else ever did. I remember you now." I struck a match and lit the name slip. The flame caught quickly. The paper curled and blackened. The smoke was thick and yellow at first, but then it turned white. Clean. It drifted downward into the opening, not rising, not twisting, just falling. I watched until the slip was gone. Then I reached for the altar. We had two. The modern one, on the table near the front window, and the older one, hidden in pieces beneath the house. I dragged the former into the center of the room, cleared it of its clean bowls and store-bought incense, and placed the cracked stones I'd found under the floor on top of it. I aligned them in a square, filled the iron bowl with fresh ash, and placed coins, fruit, and dried fish around the base. I lit 4 candles and turned off every electric light. This wasn't about power anymore. It was about recognition, the old way. No shortcuts, no temple brochures, no substitutions. My mother knelt beside me. She reached into her blouse and pulled out something I'd never seen, an old yellowed name slip, folded tight and tied with faded red string. "I kept one," she whispered. She handed it to me. I placed it beside the ash. Then I lit the incense. It burned steady this time. All 3 sticks. No flickering, no smoke curling down. Just slow, clean coils of white rising to the ceiling. I bowed 3 times, and for the first time since we arrived, I felt nothing. Not dread, not pressure, not weight, just quiet, just breath. Anya slept through the night. May curled beside her, not even stirring when I checked on them. My mother stayed on the floor, still praying softly, words returning now in full. And I sat in the offering room watching the hole. It never widened, never shrank, but it never made a sound again. We left the house 3 days later, not because we wanted to, but because we couldn't stay. The foundation was damaged from beneath. One corner had sunk by 2 inches, and the living room had cracked down the middle. The offering room's floor remained broken. The wood splintered outward from the breach. We never tried to patch it. The villagers didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. When we drove down into town for supplies before leaving, they didn't look away like before. But they didn't smile either. They simply acknowledged us. A few gave slight nods. One old man left a wrapped parcel of paper incense on our windshield. They knew something had been paid, and they accepted the cost. We moved back to Taipei a month later, a new apartment, nothing special. May went back to work. Anya started school. My mother rarely spoke anymore, but she insisted we keep a small altar in the entryway. Not decorative, not for show. Real. We use it every month. Ghost Festival came again the following year. We didn't return to Shigu. We didn't need to. Instead, we laid out our offerings on the balcony. Bowls of rice, tea, 3 sticks of incense. We didn't say a word. We just lit them and waited. In the morning, the table was empty. The rice bowls scraped clean, the tea gone. The incense had burned all the way down. Ash drifted outward like soft gray petals. And for the first time since we started this, I felt seen. The offerings had been accepted, not just by the ones we remembered, but by the one we had nearly erased. And even though we no longer spoke his name, not aloud, not again, I knew he was there. Not haunting, not hungry, just acknowledged. That was enough.